Yes, welcome back to the Magic Sponge Podcast, a miracle cure for all your rugby league injury issues. I'm Brian, I'm the guy behind NRL Physio. All the content you see on socials. My co-host James, you are here, mate. It's a brave slog to come in tonight. The Battle of Brisbane, the boys from Redcliffe have come out on top. But we have some breaking news to lead the podcast off, because I think we're all, myself included, pretty confident that the Bronx would win on Saturday night. I think they were pretty heavy favourites. They were looking good. Kevy had guaranteed finals, so you could take that to the bank. But I think this piece of news that you have pretty much makes us all look silly, because I think if we had known this prior to the game, we probably wouldn't have had any confidence in the Broncos at all. Good to have you here, mate, but hit us with that breaking news.
Yeah, thanks, Brian, and happy Father's Day to the dads out there, obviously, for those who celebrate and for those who are fathers. A lot of things happening this week in the rugby league world, Brian. Like we had some Seabelt sound bites, we had Shaun Johnson carving, we had the top 8, so the 8th position scramble, injuries everywhere, Supercoach carnage. But the thing that caught my eye the most, apart from the Broncos getting absolutely handled by the Finns, and credit to you and sucked into me, obviously, before we get in deeper, but there was a lot of chat across the Twitter space with the coach whisperer. So for those who aren't aware, there's a guy by the name of Bradley Stubbs. Calls himself the coach whisperer. He's done sort of some coaching consultancy work with different people in the past, and some of the stuff that he comes out with is absolutely top notch and absolutely borderline outrageous. And I just love leaning into it. It's deep in my tinfoil conspiracy realm, and I've got a few things that I just want to just quote straight out of the gate. So a couple of days ago, this was 2 days ago. So from Bradley Stubbs, a media report suggested I'm working with Kevin Walters. They previously worked in the past. And he said, this is untrue. If I was working with Kevin, the Broncos would be in the top 2 on the table. But I do wish my mate Kevin the best for the rest of the year. Signed off the coach whisperer. Hashtag I win grand finals. And then he follows it up with, and then someone else chimes in there like, oh, mate, they should be going top 2. They've got a really good team. You're selling yourself short. They should have the premiership sewn up by round 20. And then he chimes in, he says, well, you're right. The wrong guy has been whispering in Kevy's ear. So do we have a coach whisper controversy on our hands? Is Kevy getting coach whisper advice from someone else? And then Bradley Stubbs signs off with, well, I did help win a minor apprenticeship with the Roosters in 2018. And then, but I had it wrapped up in the last round. And then on top of that, it goes back and forward about the transition of energy and physics. And then the one today is transfer of energy. I've worked in the medical industry. I've learned how to transfer of energy is so important to winning in sport. It stops coaches from going back to back and others missing finals after being in the grand final the previous year. It can happen to the best of them. Is Bradley Stubbs just absolutely drive-bying Kevy Walters here? I don't know what's happening. I don't really understand it. It looks really funny to me. Brian, Bradley Stubbs, can we get him on the podcast? I'd really want to just get in this guy's head and just see what it's all about. I want to learn about the transfer of energy. I want to learn how to be a coach whisperer. I want to know how to expect to win and get it done. That's what I want to see, Brian. This is so good. If you haven't seen it on Twitter, just get on it. Search Bradley C. Stubbs. It's so funny, and it's definitely there's something going on in the scenes here, Brian. With I would have got the Broncos the top 2, and happens to the best of us if you miss the finals after we've been in the grand final the year before. We've got to. There's something here. I think there's something here, Brian.
Mate, this is the cherry on top of one of the best weekends of footy of all time. And I obviously say that being biased with the Finns having a big win. But yeah, I mean, the SJ stuff, so many teams are still alive. There's so much live footy from this weekend. There's so much live footy going into next weekend. Even the game this afternoon, going down to the last play of the game. Roosters have got no one on the bench. Mate, it was a cracking weekend of footy. And yeah, just to sit there tonight and we read through it before we came on, it doesn't get any better. It's rugby league to a T. And we'll talk about a lot of the footy stuff as we go through. But yeah, mate, it's just fantastic. But yeah, commiserations on the Bronx front, mate. I think we've got a question later on about what the Bronx should do, but look, let's move forward. So as always, guys, we're on YouTube. Head on over there, subscribe, give us a review, thumbs up. You know why you're here. We go through the injuries. We loop it back to SuperCoach and Fantasy. But obviously, at the moment, we'll probably be looping it more like to the mixer for fantasy purposes and also talking about finals. So there are massive finals implications this week on so many injuries. So we'll go through that, what it's looking like for your team or the team, you want most to win in the finals. If you get value out of this content, patreon.com/NRL Physio. But otherwise, let's get straight into it. The injury wrap from round 26, brought to you by Pain Pod. Drug-free pain relief anyone can use.
I don't know exactly what he's done. I would have thought it was an ankle, but I'm just guessing.
He shouldn't be out for a long period of time. I'm no doctor. We have to wait for the scans, obviously, but that'd be more positive than negative.
Let's wrap up round 26, Brian. I'm bringing the energy. I'm harnessing my Bradley C stubs here, so I'm going to go pretty hard with the energy here for the injury wrap. We're going to kick off with the HIAs. So Matty Burton, Dan Keir, Brendan Piakura, and Nat Butcher all listed here as HIAs. I guess Brendan Piakura has been a bit of a recurring one, Brian. Now, I don't know where he's up to, but is there any more detail you want to add to any of them?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing here, and I spoke about it, and I think a lot of responsibility falls to the commentary. Once again, we had the big blow up from the Reece Walsh thing in Origin of like the commentary having all this power and saying certain things and that carrying a lot of weight with fans and what they can do. And by all accounts, it mustn't have been the commentary or that I was watching potentially, or I can't remember. Maybe I didn't hear it, but apparently there was on commentary. It's category 2, so he can play next week. Were verbatim kind of what the commentary said about Matt Burton specifically. So I think it is possible for a category 2, and I'll preface this by saying all the category 1, 2 difference in how they're treated. The NRL is the only professional sporting competition that I am aware of that treats category 1 and category 2 concussion signs differently. It just doesn't happen. Most other leagues treat a concussion as a concussion, which is where most of the evidence seems to stand. You don't if you have a concussion, you're not able to come back earlier rather than later. That is different in the NRL. But even though it is different in the NRL, for example, and what I keep quoting is this whole category 2 can play next week. Oh, he can just apply for an exemption. It is possible, but it's only been done. And I went back and looked at the vague numbers. It's approximately 4 times. I won't act like I've charted every time because there might have been a few slip through the cracks, but I've got 4 down in the last 2 years since it was brought in. And there's been over 180 concussions in that time. So you're talking about a player coming back the next week. It's less than, what's that? Less than 2% or around 2% chance that they're going to come back the following week. If they have a category 2, I said category 2 concussion, but obviously I mean category 2 HIA, as they term it, the NRL. So, yeah, I think really important for people to understand, and I'm sure people who listen to this podcast, it's probably not you guys who get confused by this stuff, but I just see it time and time again because we bang on about it so much. But, yeah, I see it time and time again with the commentary. People just losing their minds about, I put the post up being Matt Burton unlikely to play next week, and people going, no, but it's category 2. He can play next week as long as he passed through all the tests. And yes, if they go to the independent doctor and they tick a whole bunch of criteria. So it's no concussions in the past 3 months, I think it is, no more than 5 concussions in your career, no complex symptoms after a concussion in the past. You have to tick all these boxes. Then you have to pass all the concussion testing during the week. You have to go to an independent doctor. So yeah, it's a whole thing. It's very rarely guaranteed. I think where it's going to really hit the head is, and I still believe there should be a week off between the prelims and the grand final, purely for the reason that I think if we get to a point where a Matt Burton is ruled out of a grand final, there is going to be a huge uproar. I don't think we're ready for the uproar that's coming if Matt Burton gets ruled out of a grand final because he gets concussed in the prelim. And it's going to be that awkward thing of everyone's going to be arguing against player safety, which that's going to be really quite difficult, I think, for the game as a whole, because everyone wants to see the best players in the best games. But then also it's like we want to be safe as well, and we've put these protocols in place, and it's just going to be all over the shop. So yeah, that's the biggest thing I want to say on that. Category 2, yes, theoretically you can see guys come back the next week, which Matt Burton was, but I think good friend Phil Gould was quoted on Twitter as saying he won't play next week. So that's that. And then the other guys, yeah, look, I think all of them, they're probably not going to be. Brendan Piakura was the interesting one, actually. He passed the testing in the sheds, but still didn't feel all that well. So once again, it shows you this, the testing in the sheds, it's not the be all and end all. You can pass all that testing and still not feel quite right, still not be okay, or still have category 1 signs from the on field. So yeah, testing in the shed's not everything. But yeah, anything else to add there, mate? I think it's usually my soapbox to hop on with the HIOs.
So out of this Cowboys Storm game, 3 big names here, 2 with probably finals implications, Brian, that might be, I guess, considerations. Ryan Paps has been reported as a bone bruise in his leg. Reece Robson has been ruled as a hamstring injury, but I think he was just an early substitution, more precautionary. And lastly, Marion Seve with an ankle injury. Where do you want to start with that game?
Yeah, I think obviously Paps is the big one. They're likely going to miss this week. I think there's a chance that he plays. But yeah, with the Storm well and truly having it in the bag, they've got Farlongo there who can easily sub in, or Nick Meaney if you really want to throw him back to fullback as well. Like, a bone bruise is nothing major, and it just looked like a knee clash at the time. But it can be really painful, that bone bruising. The big thing I say with bone bruising is we've all probably been kicked in the shins once before in our life, and that can hang around. Like, you can touch that spot on your shin like 6-8 weeks later, and like, oh, that's still really tender. So bone bruises take a while to kind of settle down, and the best, the best thing for rehab there is just to give them time to settle. So I think the risk versus reward of having, a Paps with a bone bruise in his fibula that he's played on week, heading into the finals, is probably better to give him that week to kind of to let it settle, and then have him fresher come round 1 of finals. Marion Seve with the ankle. Yeah, I went back and found that mechanism. The reason I haven't posted that yet is that really the only good camera angle of it was from the corner cam, and it wasn't really a good video. So once again, I just haven't thrown that one up yet, but it definitely didn't look good with those ankles where they can't stay on. I think he was in a boot after the game. So yeah, like you're probably looking at surgery potentially, or at least 3 to 4 weeks recovery. And if surgery, 6 to 8 weeks for Marion Seve. And he's a really good depth piece for them if they lost a centre, for example. So I think that's a bit of a blow to the Storm. And then Reece Robson apparently has been dealing with like a hamstring niggle / tightness for quite a few weeks now. Bit concerning that they had the bye last week, and they have the bye last week. Yeah, I think they did. And then come into this week, and it's still bothering him. That is a bit of a concern for me heading into the finals. I think the fact that he's got some hamstring niggles there, it leaves him at a risk of hamstring injury going into the finals, where he's got to play bigger minutes. Well, not bigger minutes, but more intense minutes. The performance is going to be a real big factor for him heading into the back end of games. And then I forgot to mention Jordan McLean. Jordan McLean was another one. He went off early, having hamstring tightness, and poor old Jordan McLean, he's been on the injury list more often than not over the past little bit. So poor old Jordan McLean. But I think Paps is probably the biggest one there. He from your end, James, what would you be risking Paps against a powerhouse Broncos next week?
Well, Kevy did guarantee the win, so there is that to consider. But for Paps, I think week off and then into week 1 of the finals, I don't know who they're going to get. It's probably looking like the Sharks down there in Melbourne, so I wouldn't be risking it, to be personally honest, mate. So I think that might wrap up the first game. We'll move to game 2. Big one out of this one. So Bulldogs v Manly was the game. Tommy Turbo has been diagnosed as a high-grade AC joint injury. And then Jason Saab, in addition to that, it's been diagnosed as a high-grade syndesmosis injury. So that's bad news for Manly, Brian.
Yeah, mate. I think, Yeah, Tommy Turbo probably the biggest. Well, yeah, arguably the biggest after a couple of injuries in the Roosters Raiders game this afternoon. But yeah, went down, and the initial concern for everyone, understandably, was he was absolutely chopped up. Like I haven't seen that much blood in a while, and from a pretty little laceration too. Like it only looked like a small nick over his the top of his eyelid there. So makes me think back to our conversation last week about the old metal studs and whether they're making a comeback, these modified boots, and, just slicing people up left, right, and center. See if that continues sort of moving forward. But yeah, that was the initial concern, was all the bleeding. But then we saw him coming off holding the shoulder. The immediate concern before I saw the mechanism was, oh crap, he's popped his shoulder out again. He's had instability events in both shoulders in the past. Not a surprise for Tommy Turbo with the long injury wrap that he has. But I think the biggest thing that saved him was tucking the arm up and in. It was above, and he managed to tuck it back under at the last moment. If he had stayed above, I think he definitely would have popped that shoulder out, with Luke Brooks coming down on top of him and kind of sandwiching him there. But it did mean that, yeah, he popped the AC joint. So we're talking a grade 3 AC joint injury, which is a complete tear of the AC joint ligaments. Look, it is something that guys can come back relatively quickly from. We saw Kalen Ponga come back, literally the exact same situation last year with Kalen Ponga. So he suffered a grade 3 AC joint injury in round 26, and he returned for, well, yeah, it was actually termed a grade 5, which is just a really significant grade 3 effectively. And he returned for the Knights in week 1 of finals. He probably didn't perform his best in the finals, but he was still out there and, doing pretty well. I think the big thing with Tommy Turbo here with the AC joint is it's the risk of aggravation or the risk of re-injury. It's not really re-injury because he's already completely torn that ligament complex. So it's not like he can necessarily injure the area, those ligaments further. But it's more now that he doesn't have those ligaments there stabilizing that joint. If he cops another knock, so he's going to have painkilling injections. He's going to have padding in around that joint to try and protect it as much as possible. But the problem is if he then cops a knock to that area, his tolerance or his threshold for that to become something that's going to force him from the field is going to be lower than normal. So it won't take as much. And I think that is that's a real concern moving forward for Manly and for Tom Trbojevic, because it's something where he could be going really well in a game, lighting it up. But then, unfortunately, he could cop a knock, doing a wrap play a block play or something like that, get lit up, and then have to be off the field for the rest of the game, which, would be a massive killer. And then Jason Saab with the syndesmosis injury. Yeah, it looked pretty nasty. I think, the tackle, Bronson Cherry's sort of full lower body weight came down on the ankle. And I think worth explaining, and whether it, keeps firing people up, I'm going to probably keep tweeting about it the same way, because I said textbook hip drop tackle mechanism. I think people seem to think that if you call something a hip drop tackle, it means A, that it's deliberate, B, that it's the dirtiest tackle ever. Like, guys, you need to understand, especially when I'm talking about it particularly, but it's about the mechanics of it. It like when I say textbook hip drop, like he grabbed the hips, he twisted, and his lower body fell on the ankle. So I'm talking about it from a mechanism of injury standpoint. I'm not the NRL, tribunal or match review committee, whatever. I'm not trying to comment on the legalities of the tackle. It's a mechanics of the tackle that result in injury quite commonly, which is why I call it textbook, because textbook results in syndesmosis injuries and MCL injuries. The other one that I'm copping a lot of heat for now is the Elliot Whitehead one from this afternoon on Brandon Smith. But it's about the mechanics of the tackle. It's not. I'm not saying that these guys have done some dirty tackle it's just like all high tackles. Not all high tackles are dirty tackles. That it's still called a high tackle because it had contact with the head. These hip drop tackles are still hip drop tackles. It doesn't mean they need to be banned for a ridiculous amount of time. Like, Jesus Christ, I love tooting my own horn, as you know, but I was one of the first people to start talking about these type of tackles because they were resulting in syndesmosis injuries, MCL injuries over and over and over again. Friggin' started calling them hip drop tackles, like, because there was those mechanics that resulted in these kind of things. So that's what I'm talking about. I'm not having a crack, and usually it's at your club's favorite player or whatever. I'm not saying that they're dirty. I'm not saying it's a bad tackle. I'm just saying that is the mechanics that result in these kind of injuries. There's my rant. I'm going to be on my soapbox a bit tonight, James, so I apologise in advance.
Fire away and keep firing, Brian, because I want to have a little broadside here as well, because one of the funniest things I saw out of this, I guess, presser was, or might have been men after, I can't remember exactly what it was, but I think someone was asked to Seabold directly about Tommy Turbo's shoulder, and he sort of said, oh, well, no, there's nothing wrong, it's just a pain management issue. But I would argue having a high-grade AC joint injury is a bit going on in your shoulder, and that's going to put him at fairly high risk, as you mentioned, moving forward. Thinking back to Kalen last year, certainly when he played, he was nowhere near at his best, and Manly need to make a run from outside the top 8. And if Tommy Turbo's not fully healthy, that doesn't happen. So I really think Manly's chances of getting deep into the finals are probably fairly limited as it stands right here, right now. So I think that's bad news. I don't know. I think Seabold might have just fallen over his words there with saying, oh, no, there's nothing wrong with the shoulder. But I was like, I had a bit of a squint on my face thinking, like, Jesus, if I had a grade 3 AC and someone was like, oh, no, there's nothing wrong with your shoulder, I'd be like, well, mate, I would beg to differ, is what I would say to that. So that was my little takeaway from there. Did you have a sort of snippet of Seabold there, Brian? Was that sort of the read you had as well?
Yeah, I think he also said something about, like, and it's true, there's plenty of players playing with AC joint injuries week in, week out. There's not many, and that's a very accurate comment to make, but not all of those AC joint injuries are created equal, right? Like, a lot of them have suffered them ages ago. Not a lot of them will suffer a grade 3 2 weeks out from a finals game and then have to play on that. Like, Tom has been apparently getting painkilling injections in his left AC joint all season because he's been dealing with an AC joint issue. Oh. So, like, yeah, completely understand that AC joint injuries are played through week in and week out. But yeah, there's a difference between playing through like a chronic AC joint injury, a minor sprain or something like that, and playing on a complete tear 2 weeks later. I will just mention on Jason Saab, because I know I ranted on the soapbox, but in terms of the severity, they've kind of said they're hopeful that he'll only miss like 2 weeks. I would be shocked if he's able to only miss 2 weeks after that. I think that looked moderate to high grade. So, like, fingers crossed, hopefully for Manly that is true. But I think we were talking, potentially they might have to carry it back on the bench to cover Tommy Turbo if he aggravates it. But they might not have that luxury with Jason Saab, potentially out with that syndesmosis injury. So it's going to put a bit of a challenge to the Sea Eagles and the makeup of their side.
100%. Panthers Bunnies was the next one, Brian. Not a huge amount we need to talk through here. Jack Wighton looks like a lowish grade calf injury. The Bunnies only have 1 game left, and he's not going to play that, I would assume.
No. I'm not sure about the Bunnies and what they're prioritising this time of year, but I don't think you'd risk it. For Jack Wighton, I did find it very interesting, James, one thing that I didn't put in the run sheet, and just quickly mention that Ben Hornby 2 weeks ago ruled Latrell Mitchell out for the year.
Yes.
And then, so ruled him out for the year, said, yeah.
Look, put your tinfoil hat on here, Brian, first, before you go further.
It is
put the hat on, it's on.
It's deep on my head, because
there
is some
tinfoil areas.
There is some bullshit happening here, and I'm happy to call it out, because to rule him out, to say, and look, I know there was some off-field stuff going on, but to throw it back on the injury and be like, oh, his recovery's been slower than usual because he's been sick, and then find out he's got a 1-match ban to serve, and all of a sudden, oh no, he's not out for the year, and the NRL have come out and said that he will be able to serve the ban when the South Sydney medical team pass him fit to play. I'm like, well, mate, the head coach said a week ago that he was out for the year. So where have we sent him in the last week that he might be fit for round 27. That is some like if that
Brian,
happens,
the layers get
yeah,
better. Think about this as well: is where did Andrew Abdo come from before he was the CEO of NRL? He was the South CEO. Do you think he has like a good hookup with the South Sydney doctor? Maybe. I'm not saying anything or insinuating anything, but this is one of the best rugby league sweep under the rugs I've ever seen. If they pull this off, if they can, like, I mean, it's similar to the Taylor May
yeah,
suspension when you serve it. And honestly, Brian, I don't care less. Like, I'm not a Souths fan. I want to see Latrell there round 1 next year. I'm all for him serving it this year. I couldn't care less. There are going to be people who blow up about it, but it is a G up. Let's call it as
yeah.
it is. Like, there's a lot of G up happening in this space, which to me is very funny. But yeah, I kind of love it. I kind of love the layer of, like, yeah, where Abdo used to be, and he was definitely probably still well connected within that club. So yeah, fair bit going on there, Brian, which you draw a good point to, but it's also very funny that South Doctor's just going to call the shots of when Latrell is deemed to be fit, and that'll impact on his availability for next year. So I'm sure the club doctor is under no pressure from anyone else around the scene there for Latrell's availability. We'll move off the tinfoil areas, Brian. We'll get back to injuries. Eels vs Dragons was the next game here. This was a wild old game of footy. Christian Tuipulotu was a hamstring rule out pre-game. I guess he might be touch and go for next week and potentially finals, Brian, I'm assuming.
Yeah, oh mate, apparently it was pretty nasty. Not that I saw this myself, but I had a few people message me and say that he was on like crutches or something. So yeah, potentially could be a really nasty one. So yeah, I don't think it's sounding like even if the Dragons play finals that he'll be available anytime soon. Which yeah, I thought he's playing pretty well for them. So that's a bit like Ravalava was back out there today. This weekend and doing Ravalava things again. But yeah, no, I can't see Tuipulotu being available anytime soon.
We'll move on to the Battle of Brisbane, Brian. Dolphins v Broncos. This was one of the darkest days in the Broncos' history, this one, especially after Kevy Walters guaranteed that we would win. So thanks for ruining Christmas, Kevin Walters, you jerk. Injuries, Kotoni Staggs with a quad concern, so he may not play next week. Brian, I don't care about the Broncos. Do we need to talk about this very much? Like, we're just going to get towed by the Storm next week anyway. Like, that's going to be our reality.
Yeah, mate, I don't think there's a lot there. Yeah, there's not a lot to talk about with the quad issue. Once again, risk versus reward of playing him next week. If it was a grand final, you'd probably play him. It's probably not going to be a grand final. I will shout out actually something that the Bronx can take away. And I think, I apologize to anybody, particularly Patreons, who sort of said, they're asking about Payne Haas and what I thought about his performance, like leading into the weekend. How did I think it'd go? And I said, look, I'm not expecting the usual Payne Haas. Because a part of that was that I thought that the Bronx would win quite comfortably. So I'm like, there's no way they're going to push him that hard to kind of, when they're up. I think he kind of, was forced to play huge minutes because of the way the game went. It just wasn't going well for the Bronx, which was a bit of a surprise. But shout out to him because he returned from that Liz Frank injury and pumped out a mega workload, something I didn't see coming. Happy to put my hand up. But yeah, like shout out to him. That was a really positive thing for the Bronx was Payne Haas's performance coming back off that Liz Frank injury.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. More brighter things in my neck of the world now, Brian, with Sharks v Warriors. Honestly, if Jesus hasn't returned in Auckland, you might as well just call Shaun Johnson the second coming of our Lord and Saviour Jesus Christ, because my God, if only he was on free-to-air telly a bit more, Brian, I think we would have seen so much more of him and so many more highlights. Out of the game, though, Kurt Capewell and Mitch Barnett, I don't know too much about injuries here, so we might as well talk ad nauseum about SJ if you like.
Yeah, mate, I just included them there because I had a few people ask me about them. Look, I'll admit I was in full fan mode for this game. So you couldn't have had me more like honed in on Shaun Johnson for this game. So anything that was happening around, I haven't seen any reports of Capewell or Barnett being injured, but apparently they both did kind of leave the field not looking great. So I haven't had a chance to go back and have a look, but yeah, mate, I'm wearing my Shaun Johnson shirt again. I could not wear it. Like I can't believe it. I could not, when they were down, I was like, there's no way that this is going to happen. The Sharkies looking well on top. And then SJ, mate, it was just, I think everything that we spoke about like 3-4 weeks ago, where it was Super Saturday, Vossi on the call, SJ just showing and going, line breaks, which, you know, he missed some tackles there too, which is, you know, right in SJ's wheelhouse. But just Vossi going mental, SJ lighting it up, putting on the try to finish the game. 60 points scored, you know, a classic Warriors Super Saturday game from the 2010s, mate. It was just nostalgia for me, but it was also just the perfect way for SJ to go out. I will watch the highlights of that game till the cows come home. It was fantastic, and I'm sure your household was pretty similar. It was a bit musty in my lounge room, I must say. A few, you know, I had to clear the eyes a little bit at times.
Oh, mate. There was onions getting cut up galore in my house. I was like, my God, this is ridiculous. I think with SJ as well, like, you know, 101 Supercoach points, it just makes you feel good. Makes you feel like all is well and good in the world there with Shaun Johnson. So, yeah, sad to see a really iconic player not be around next year. It's going to be a big change. And, you know, what he's been able to do there for the Warriors over many, many years. And, you know, he was a bit injury bit at the Sharks there, but my God, he's had a good career. You wouldn't, if you were going to take someone's career, geez, Shaun Johnson would be a good one to have, just the way he plays. We'll go on to the Knights v Titans next, Brian. So pre-game, AJ Brimson was ruled out with groin surgery. Keano Kini was ruled out with a cork, and Phil Sammy was as well. I think they just called him just niggles or general soreness. I guess for the Titans, you know, they're dead and buried this year, so I don't know if we'll see these guys next week. For Titans fans, is there anything you want to update?
No, I think the Keeney Sammy minor issues. AJ Brimson, the groin surgery, that's a pretty significant one. I think the photo I put up about the type of groin surgery he may be having got a few people talking about, like cutting the groin tendon. That is probably for like chronic groin issues. Cam Munster spoke about where he tore his groin tendon as being like he kind of did the surgery without the surgery. So effectively, the best way to imagine it is you've got a muscle that attaches from down on the inner side of your knee all the way up to your pelvis in your groin. That muscle is quite, you know, tight or tense and causing irritation up near the groin. So what they do is they go in with a scalpel, as hard as this is to believe, and they literally cut it away, that tendon off the pelvis. And so what it does is it just obviously comes off, like, you know, as if you're cutting a rope. But what that tendon has the ability to do is then kind of scar in. So it kind of like almost attaches in to the surrounding musculature. So it just shortens the muscle a little bit. It stops some irritation up through there. You do lose a little bit, obviously, of groin strength in through that area. But the good news is you've got plenty of groin muscles in around there that can help kind of make up for that. So, yeah, it's a pretty nasty surgery, nasty sounding surgery. It's not often you'll hear about a muscle getting purposely torn or ruptured for the sake of getting rid of pain, but this is one of them. But he should be fine, you know, during the preseason, usually around 3 months recovery. So what are we now, the 9th? So yeah, by the 1st of the 12th, you know, he should be going pretty good, I think.
Yeah, nice update there, Brian. We'll go to the Roosters v Raiders in this one. So there's some big names out of this, and with the Roosters deep in finals contention, this is alarm bells for them. So for the Roosters, we might start there because they've got the bigger names on the list here. So Sam Walker sounds like a confirmed ACL injury in his knee. Brandon Smith looks like a fairly high-grade MCL from that hip drop tackle, as you alluded to earlier. Victor Radley's been reported as an AC joint injury. From the Raiders, Jamal Fogarty was ruled out pre-game with a hamstring injury, and then Jordan Rapana has been reported as a facial fracture. There's heaps to cover here, Brian, but you know, I'm a Sam Walker enthusiast, and I was pretty devo to see that he's facing ACL injury, which is going to impact on his availability next year considerably, isn't it?
Yeah, 100%. We spoke about after he had the partial ACL, the I guess the implications for that moving forward. Specifically reference Matt Lodge, how he had a partial ACL tear that progressed to a complete rupture. It can last for 3 months. It can last for 3 years. You don't really know. But there is an increased risk there. Up to 40% of partial ACL tears that don't get treated with surgery then progress to full ACL ruptures in professional sport athletes, particularly change of direction. It's probably even higher in change of direction sport athletes. It's because once you have that partial tear there's bound to be at least a little bit of instability or a bit less support there for the knee. And then if you've got guys who are, once again, change of direction, planting the foot, trying to decelerate as Sam Walker was. There's just a little bit less support. You would have seen that he gets that knee strapped week in and week out to try and give a little bit of support. Unfortunately, in those kind of cases, the strapping isn't going to do much. I think I had a few questions of should he have just got the surgery last year and then got through it? But the hard thing is that up until today, if anybody had suggested the surgery to you, you would have laughed at them, right? Because you would have been like, look at how good he has been. If you had spoken about him during the week, said, oh, what do you reckon, Sam Walker, she got the ACL surgery late last year? You would have been like, hell no. He has been really, really good for the Roosters this year. A big reason why they've been so good. So it's that risk versus reward scenario. He could have, by pure luck, not planted that foot the way that he did today, and he could have gone another 3-4 years and not had an issue with it. It was just that particular plan in that particular direction. And unfortunately, worth mentioning as we're recording, so it's like 9:40 on Sunday night. It's come out about 20 minutes ago that scans have confirmed an ACL rupture, so he will be facing surgery. 9 months recovery, I would say, for a young player like him. The Roosters are usually pretty conservative with their ACLs and guys coming back from those kind of things. It's the 9th now, so you probably, I doubt the soonest you can come back from an ACL injury like that is 6 months. So what's that? That would have him right for kind of around round 1-ish. But I think, you're probably looking at least 6 weeks missed early in the season. That'd put him at about, 8 months. Yeah, but it could be up to 12 weeks, half the season missed, which is just huge news as it comes to the Roosters. They've got Sandon Smith there. Sam Walker also, am I wrong in saying he's off contract at the end of next year? So
he can negotiate from the end of 25, yeah. So I think he can negotiate from next year, I think. With the view of he could go somewhere in 26, I think.
Yeah, sorry. So I thought it was he could
something like that,
from November now.
Well, maybe it is, yeah. You might be right, actually.
You know how there's that thing. Yeah, correct. So I think he can, he'll almost be negotiating while he's recovering from his ACL surgery, which would, that adds a whole, it adds a whole other aspect to it. So, I think no more concerned about his his career moving forward than any other young player who suffers an ACL injury, even though he had the partial ACL beforehand. The biggest thing will be secondary damage, which we very rarely find out about, meniscus, MCL, cartilage, articular cartilage, these kind of things. Are there any injuries there? Hopefully not. But thoughts go out to Sam because, the Roosters were looking good. It's going to be really interesting what they do there. Brandon Smith with the MCL injury, that looked bad. It looked like, at least a moderate to high grade, 3 to 6 weeks. His final series are definitely in jeopardy. Once again, with the hip drop tackle here. Yes, textbook hip drop tackle. No, not the worst hip drop I've ever seen. It was all in movement. I don't think he did it purposely. It didn't look like he consciously chose. It wasn't the worst one where you kind of see them grab a stationary player and just decide to lift their feet and lunge on it. So it wasn't the worst one, but it still was a hip drop tackle. It just wasn't a bad one. It wasn't, didn't show a lot of intent or recklessness or anything like that. I thought he just got dragged around, but still a hip drop tackle. Victor Radley with the AC joint, he got absolutely lit up by Joseph Tapine, huge. So once again, a bit like the Tommy Turbo, apply all the things there. The only difference with Radley, obviously him being a forward, he'll be required to make a lot more tackles, higher risk of aggravation in a forward because they're more contact, those kind of things. So in terms of performance, he may... there could be some risks there for some early showers, decreased ability to put on, Victor loves to lay down hits. He's not going to be laying down a hit on that shoulder, you wouldn't think, because he'll be a bit gun shy on that side. Jordan Rapana, facial fracture. It looked really nasty. I'm going to shout out to one of my followers on Twitter who is a facial surgeon, I believe. He commented, orbital emphysema and hypoglobus, malposition of the globe. Rapana will have a likely fractured medial/inferior orbit with communication to his sinuses. Entrapment of inferior rectus muscle is the main concern in these cases. Now, I know my anatomy fairly well. There are some things in there that even I am impressed with that confuse me and send me off to Google some things and have a look, because I love that kind of stuff. But effectively, in layman's terms, it's a significant facial fracture. It wasn't just, straightforward. You could see kind of things were a bit all over the shop. So yeah, I said 3 to 6 weeks, but I think it's more going to be that 6 week and his season will be over, unfortunately, for the Raiders. Mate, how are you feeling as a Sam Walker enthusiast? The ACL is a bit of a blow to not only him, but the Roosters as well, heading into finals.
And Queensland Maroons, Brian, to add another one on top there.
Yeah, Daly better play again.
Yeah, we Daly going around, or it might be Dearden and Munster, I guess. If you might be looking at Sam Walker in a jersey in 2026, perhaps, if he can get back fully from the ACL. But it's sad news, because he's one of the most exciting players in the game. And I'll always bring back, when he did the partial tear, he should never have been playing Queensland Cup to learn a lesson, because he was a young player. So, I really feel for Sam Walker, because none of this was really his fault. He sort of got, in my opinion, treated fairly poorly there by the Roosters, which is what I'll say, from the hip as a bit of a drive-by. Lastly, to wrap up, Brian, NRLW. So we've got a few injuries out of this one. A few that might be, I guess, mixer relevant as well for those who are mixer enthusiasts. So Kennedy Cherrington with a knee injury, Hannah Southwell ankle injury, Georgia Roach hamstring, Jamie Chapman hamstring, Ali Brigginshaw facial injury, China Palata with a knee injury, and then Samima Taufa and Lily Peacock concussions. Who do we want to talk to more here for tonight, Brian?
Well, I think the big one is Samima Taufa with the concussion straight off the bat, because she's a big mixer play, and she'll obviously definitely miss next week. So no one get caught in a Jacob Little situation and pick Samima Taufa next week. She definitely won't be playing, or not definitely, but less than 2% chance, as we know from our challenging the I don't think it's ever been successfully challenged in the NRLW. So we'll say 0% for now. Kennedy Cherrington with the knee, I haven't had a chance to post that up yet, but it was a pretty nasty one. She got landed on a bit of hyperextension. The coach said post-match that he was hoping for a meniscus tear and she'd only miss 1 week. And I was like, "Ooh, that doesn't make I know there are some people who play through meniscus tears, but yeah, it looked pretty nasty. I would be surprised if there wasn't some form of like PCL or even LCL involvement, some sort of ligamentous injury there, because it looked pretty nasty, a pretty nasty hyperextension. Apart from that, I think Ali Brigginshaw with the face, it was pretty swollen. It didn't look nice. So if there's a fracture there, that's huge for the Bronx and their finals hopes. They're in a good spot at the moment, and who would have thought that early in the season after their first couple of games. And then Jamie Chapman, the only other one. She's been she went off early. I think she's had her hamstring heavily strapped, it seems like Origin. So I don't know whether she's kind of playing through something there that's kind of bothering her. But yeah, and then the China Palata was an interesting one. I only saw that just in passing, but it looked like a non-contact, like change of direction kind of one. She went down, held it in heaps of pain. She did have strapping already around her knee. Then after two minutes, got up and ran back into the defensive line. And I was like, oh man, this is your classic, ACL, gets heaps of pain, then goes back. And literally she made one tackle and went down holding her knee again. And I'm like, oh, she's done her ACL. But she got up again and just the trainer came over and she just ran off the field. And so I don't know whether she's got because she had strapping on that knee already, whether she's got a really nasty patellofemoral thing that flares up. I know David Clemmer had that in recent seasons, or whether there was an ACL injury there. I'm actually, from a physio perspective, going to be really interested in that one. But that's about it from the NRLW, I think, mate.
Lovely wrap up, Brian. We've done well to get through all that for this week just gone. So big implications across the board there. We're going to go straight into the Patreon questions now. So patreon.com/NRL Physio. Only a couple on this week, Brian, but that's probably a good thing considering how many things we've already had to get through. Question one's about Dylan Edwards. It looks a little bit limited coming back from his PCL injury. Do you think he'll be back to 100% by finals, and what's his re-injury risk moving forward?
Yeah, I posted about this. Joey kind of brought it up, and we've seen it. I've seen it in a couple of his chases. There, he loves to do that thing when players sort of burst through the line and come to him one-on-one, he does that play where he starts to almost run backwards as well to track back. And I think they even there was a clip floating around where they gave Edwards a lot of credit for stopping a Storm try because he was kind of tracking back and Jerome Hughes got thrown off by it and stuff like that. But there's been another couple where he's done the same thing, but the pass has been given and the player just absolutely burns him and he doesn't seem to have it. I'll go on record once again. I think I gave myself a wrap earlier in this podcast. So I'll give myself an unwrap again and say that I kind of put more stead in Dylan Edwards being a superhuman athlete than I probably should have for this, my expectations for him coming back here, because he's human is what I'll say here. He is human. He has looked how I have seen PCL injuries who come back, PCL ruptures who come back in 4 weeks. Look like those guys, they come back, they don't have as much kind of agility, change of direction. They don't have as much straight line speed in those early days. They have a higher aggravation risk, and that's kind of what he looks like. He's aggravating it during games. He's not running as fast. He's not as agile. Will he be 100% by finals? I don't think so. I think even if he has next week off, I don't see him being 100%. Is he still a better option than Dane Laurie at fullback? I still think for the cohesiveness of their attack, he knows their game. I do think so. But yeah, I mean, if he continues to aggravate it, say they play next week and he continues to aggravate it, it's at least going to be a talking point. I don't think you would ever not play Dylan Edwards if he's relatively fit and ready to go. But once again, it's about performance. It's not about whether he's fit to play. It's whether, he's fit to perform. And I just think lately he's been at 75, 80%. I mean, how would your eye test be on that side of things, James?
I tend to agree with you about, he's definitely not going to be 100%. I guess the thing I just was posing in my head then, they got the Titans next week. The Titans haven't looked really like they're that keen or interested in playing rugby league football as it stands, Brian. My question is, with Nathan Cleary out until at least finals, do you rest round 27? Do you rest week 1 and then just bring both of them back when it's must-win footy? Because I think you could do that in those situations where you're just like, all right, well, we're Penrith, we're three-peat premiers. These two guys are proven Origin class players, almost best of their positions. I think Nathan probably is, and Edwards is in that conversation. Do you just say, all right, we've got 2 weeks to get these guys as right as possible, and then just see what we can do and try and win 3 in a row? Because that's really where you got to get to by that second week of the finals. Is can you peel off 3 wins in a row? There's not a lot of non-New South Wales teams in the finals either, Brian. So your chances of playing, out of state are probably fairly low there as well. So I just wonder maybe as an option, do they rest Edwards round 27, Cleary round 27, and then do they rest week 1 as well and come back week 2? I don't know. I'd be interested to see where the Panthers' heads are at with that, because you could certainly play Dylan Edwards. And you're probably going to beat the Titans next week and secure a top 2, because you're not going to get first. You're going to get second and get a home final and, have the finals go through you. But part of me just thinks, this team's been there and done that. They've got enough big game players. Can you just get them both back in week 2 and hope for the best and just hope that you catch lightning in a bottle again and make it 4 in a row? I don't know. I'd be interested in your thoughts on that.
Yeah, mate, I don't mind it at all. You've got Dane Laurie there. You've got a guy like Brad Schneider there who have shown they can win, who have shown they're more than capable. I love the take, to be honest. I think, even if you bring them back for, say, week 2, if they lose week 1 by some reason. But, if you look at it now, they're probably going to get a home final because the Roosters dropped their bundle today. The Roosters without Sam Walker, without Brandon Smith, mate, it's a prime one where you could potentially buy Nathan Cleary and Dylan Edwards 2 further weeks to kind of settle things down. It'd be a hell of a, imagine that storyline in week 1 of finals, Dylan Edwards and Nathan Cleary. We're probably talking out our asses here, and no way will Ivan Cleary do that. But it's a pretty interesting prospect to talk about, because it would be an all-time ballsy play, but we love ballsy plays on this podcast, so I don't mind it at all.
Be super interesting to me what happens there. And predicting what Ivan Cleary will do, as we've seen throughout the years, Brian, it is impossible to see what is going on there behind closed doors. Question 2 is about the Battle of Brisbane. What do you think the Bronx need to do to turn it around, Brian? So you can either choose to answer this and give us some constructive criticism or just rinse us. You've earned that right as a Finns fan. So what would you rather do?
Mate, I mean, I'm going to throw to you as the Bronx fan because you probably pay more attention to it than me. I think from my perspective as an outsider or as somebody who definitely appreciates the Broncos, and appreciated the Broncos quite heavily when, when the Finns weren't around. Yeah, we've never been big Kevy guys, ever. I think we've also never been big Billy guys, and like it's hard to put it down to one player and kind of be like, yeah, but I don't even think it's that. I just think, yeah, I think they obviously did really, really well last year, but potentially that papered over some coaching, issues around that. You're obviously not inside the four walls, but the reports that come back are Kevy's very emotional. We've seen him tear up giving certain things, and I just wonder how that comes across to guys, in that kind of atmosphere. It would be interesting. I'm sure if you ask any of the Bronx, they love Kev and those kind of things, but it's kind of two of the last 3 years now where they've shown that they've got what it takes. Like I think this year, at the start of the year, they looked really, really good when Reynolds was fit. And granted, Reynolds was injured for a big chunk of the season, and then in 2022, they looked fantastic as well. And both years they're more than likely going to miss finals, which I just think isn't good enough. I mean, I'll throw to you as the Bronx fan, but I just don't think, even though they made a grand final last year, as we said, I personally hated the chatter around, but the loss is okay. It's the one we had to lose because we're going to be there and abouts for however long. Well, here we are another year into Adam Reynolds' career, might only have 1 year left, potentially 2, and you haven't made the finals. Yeah, I just think that's, not good enough, and something pretty significant has to change.
I guess the defense you could make is injuries. Reece Walsh missed periods of the year. Reynolds missed periods of the year. Payne Haas missed periods of the year with the knee, whatever happened there. There has been some health issues there for the Broncos. But then if we sort of take a step back, and they did lose, Flagler and Herbie, and also Kurt Capewell as well. So I guess you could make an argument, well, they did lose a few players. They didn't really gain anyone who was a game breaker. So that's the argument you can make. But I would sort of say, well, that's all well and good. But there's other teams in this comp that have lost players for significant amounts of time that hasn't impacted on their season. Look at the Storm. They've had Munster for very little part of the year. They haven't skipped a beat. Papenhuyzen's been missing for big parts of the year. If your squad's good enough, your coach is good enough, you can get through that. Broncos' depth is really limited. And I think that was something we looked at the start of the year. Edge depth is terrible. Depth in the top 30 looks pretty ordinary to me as well, to be fair. I don't see a lot coming through. And then I guess on the coaching front, we go on Kevy most weeks, and that's just where I stand on that. But if you take a step back and go, well, actually, let's look at this guy's credentials coaching wise. So let's step back and actually review that and think about that. So from memory, and again, someone can call me up if this is wrong and rinse me on the internet. That's all good. But he got moved on by Wayne when he was an assistant. So Wayne said, thanks, but no thanks. I don't want you here anymore. He served, I think, less than a year of a 4-year deal at Catalan. So he got moved on there for some reason. And then he got moved on by Craig Bellamy as an assistant as well. The Queensland coaching gig was probably paper mache'd over by the fact they had 3 or 4 immortals in that team that were probably calling the shots there more than him coaching the shots. And then at the Bronx, you miss the finals, you make the grand final off the back of Throbbers throbbing, in my opinion, and then you miss the finals again badly this year. The other issue I have, and we talk about it a lot, and I don't hate Billy Walters. That's just, let me clear that up. But I think when you see him getting a 9 jumper and there's 3 better hookers at the club in Blake Moser, in Tyson Smoothie, and also Corey Pakes, who had a really good season a couple of years back and he's just gone MIA. If there's 3 guys in your top 30 that are better players than the coach's son and he gets getting picked, I think the fish will rot and people pick that up. These guys are top-notch players. They're smart enough to realise actually, this guy keeps getting a jumper. He's not as good as these other guys in the squad. Why is that happening? Why is my mate missing out? Because they're going to be mates as well. There's going to be clicks within the team. It's a top 30 squad. People are going to come through. People go across to people. And what we could say about Billy is he's not a top 30 player. Where would he be a top 30 at any other club? Because he got signed for the Bronx from the West Tigers, who, as we know, are not exactly a powerhouse either. So I don't know, Brian. I think there's things that need to be addressed here, but Kev is going to be protected by those within the four walls because of what he's done for the club as well.
As you can see, we're both pretty passionate about it, but at the end of the day, yeah, the Broncos are going to have to try and figure it out because there'll be another long off season, not finishing in the finals. And I think at the end of the day, probably the most important thing is they keep Adam Reynolds as fit and healthy as possible, as we saw this year. Let's go into SuperCoach Corner, mate. I'll throw to you for your score, but also we've got some congratulations to go to our draft players for this week. I lost in draft number 1. I lost in the prelim to draft number 2 to both of these guys. So I feel a little bit vindicated in losing to the premiers in both comps at least. But yeah, throw out some congrats.
Yeah, I think totally, Brian. Like, I think in Sponge 1, like, Peter came from 6th, ran 4 in a row, and then Josh came from 5th in draft 2, and he won 4 in a row as well. So, mate, pretty epic efforts to come from 6th and 5th to win there. I choked in both first rounds of the finals, Brian, so I did not go so well, whereas you went fairly deep in there. So congrats to you as well. And congrats to everyone for getting on board with the Sponge. In Standard, I went 1-2-0-5, probably a bit unders this week. Captain Kalen Ponga, had Sam Walker, no Tom Turbo next week, no halfback for me with no Walker or Cleary. So, yeah, a little bit of a struggle. I guess not much else to sort of say on the trades front here, Brian, but I think next week we might just like chat about bounce back players or things that we took away from this season and then look at accountability and what we talked about preseason, maybe bring it back and just do it right now while the iron's hot. Because I think it's good to review things ASAP because by the time it gets around to March next year, we've forgotten everything and all the context that happens, don't we?
Yeah, 100%. I like that because I think we missed out on the Golden Sponge Awards last year, which was slack of us after bringing it in the year before. So we only had it for 1 year, but we'll make sure we get into it this year because I did really enjoy it. I think I've got the questions saved somewhere so we can try and replicate that. I got 1, 3, 4, 9 this week. So what I'm saying is trades are overrated, mate. You don't need them. It made me play Dylan Brown, these kind of guys when I probably wouldn't have otherwise. Yeah, really good week for me. Hopefully climb back up some ranking spots because it's really important that I finish like 1,500th instead of 2,500th. That will mean a lot, and definitely be really important. I think the only thing I'd say is if you've got a trade and you don't bring in Paul Alamotti with the Panthers playing the Titans, he's goal kicking, you are mental. Do it. That is your trade. You bring in Paul Alamotti and you ride it to hopefully first place, whoever you are in 3rd or 4th or 5th, and actually have some trades left because I read somewhere that I think the guy in 1st doesn't have any trades left. So what'd you do in the mixer, mate? We'll wrap it up real quick, go through what we did this week and then what we're looking at next week.
Stinker in the mixer. So 297 for me, Brian. I had Jacob Little, who I had no idea was missing this week. I didn't know that, so I missed that completely. I boosted Simon Taufa, who went off with HIA in the 8th minute. Then I played Olivia Koenig. She scored well. Adam Reynolds I boosted, and he got HIA and Lowell at the Broncos in that one too. Isabel Kelly and Kalen Ponga rounded out my week. So I had, similar to your week last week, I had an absolute bed shit across multiple aspects there. A few things out of my control, and that's just the way it is. For next week, NRL players, Roosters players versus the Bunnies is a prime matchup. Storm players versus the Broncos. Maybe even Paul Alamotti as well is a shout in there for centre wing, Brian. NRLW players, I think you got to like the Titans v Para. I think, Georgia Hale, Ivani Politi versus Para. Any of the Cows players might be worth a shout versus the Tigers. Maybe it's a Manzelman. Maybe it's a Kai Whitfield as a bit of a pod, even though she's wing fullback only. And I guess Tegan Berry's the one there as well to consider. So they're probably how I'm shaping up my setups for the week coming. You went better than me this week. I think everyone went better than me this week. Brian, how did you score?
Yeah, mate, 352 for me, but just still stitch up. Like Adam Reynolds, I boosted him as well. It shows how confident we were in the Bronx doing well. A Manselman plays her first non-70-minute game in I don't know how long. Politi lowest score in a while. Isaiah Yeo, the missionary, well, he's actually not the missionary of the mixer because it's fantasy scoring. So he is more, something a bit exotic. Like, I don't want to come up with anything too exotic. It's 10 p.m. So, I'm sure the reverse slider or something like that, always a favorite. But, did well for me, and he was about it. But yeah, I think next week's Titans NRLW is the big one against the Eels. Without Cherrington, I think could be a goer. But otherwise, mate, yeah, I think that's about it. For anybody listening along or watching along, we had a few technological issues this evening, so apologies if it's a bit choppy here and there. We try and keep away from that where we can. But yeah, James, what a weekend of footy. What a weekend of footy coming up. Like, I'm so amped for next weekend. There are so many games that mean so much. I think the Finns versus Knights now is effectively it's the finals a week early. Yeah. It's like if you that's awesome. Like awesome.
Yeah.
I mean, I love the Finns, yeah. But just stuff like that. You've got just games mean so much. There's so little, like we talk about restings and stuff like that. I don't think there's too many teams that could afford to rest guys next week because I think there's a lot going on. So,
no, additionally, Brian, like it's my favorite time of the year. We've got NRL finals on our doorstep. We've got NFL season starting, and we're both sick for NFL. I just love this time of year. It's the best. It's the best sport you can get around. You get 16 games of NFL, and then you get the best playing NRL. The footy's good. It's a good time of year. The weather's getting warm, far out. Like, stars are aligning.
Yeah, mate, we jumped in the pool 3 times in the last week. So the weather's looking good. And the next 6 weeks, when you have NFL to wake up to on a Monday morning after a full weekend of NRL, it just does not get any better. So I completely agree with you. Otherwise, guys, that's it for the week. If you like the pod, give us a review, recommend to a friend. If you want more info like this, patreon.com/NRL Physio. But otherwise, up the mighty Redcliffe Dolphins.